The third industrial revolution.
He also goes on to mention that we've had 200 years of coal and oil and gas that we've used to power our economic activity from our transport, but also to fuel our light sources, our heating, as well as things like our pharmaceuticals and our pesticides. But all of this oil and gas and coal has come from the burial grounds of ancient dinosaurs that lived and died millions of years ago and were buried into the earth over millions of years and then turned into these materials which we can use for energy, such as coal, oil and gas, for example. And these energy sources have taken a huge amount of time to be created through the natural processes of sort of rock formation. And unfortunately, when we burn these fossil fuels, it is creating a lot of CO2 and a lot of other negative gases which are fueling our climate change. And we're also, for example, unleashing a lot of methane gas and nitrous oxide from the way in which we produce goods and services. So, for example, in the past we've used a lot of coal power stations. So we basically just extract all this coal from these burial grounds of dead dinosaurs. We transport it to a factory and it gets burnt in order to create energy, which we then use to power all of our economic activity. And we also have gas power stations as well, and we use a lot of oil for transport and logistics. And you use your oil, your petrol, to power your cars, your business vehicles, and that's also how we get our goods and services delivered to us in the current model. It's also how things like ships move their shipping containers around in order to enable us access to the goods and services that we need. So there's fossil fuels that run right through the system to power it at every stage of its journey, and at every step we need to embed more energy to get it to where it's needed. And so there's other things like pharmaceuticals, which are often made by oil, for example, and they're also produced and distributed with fossil fuels to get to where they're needed. Pesticides as well, and all the different plastics that we use to package our materials. Now, the problem is, the more fossil fuels that we burn, it basically unleashes all these gases, such as methane, CO2, nitrous oxide. All of our economic activity releases all these gases through our transport vehicles, our power stations, our buildings, and our logistics vehicles, as well as all of the animal husbandry around the world, such as the biggest polluter of which would be cows, the methane gas that's produced from those. And all of these gas particles that are being emitted into the atmosphere are making it so that when sunbeams hit Earth, they would, in the past, mostly bounce back out into space, and that heat is bounced away, keeping our planet at a relatively consistent temperature. However, with all these fossil fuels creating all these gases, which are made out of particles going into our atmosphere, the sun's beams are not going back out into space anymore. Instead, they're hitting these particles, these physical particles which are in the air, and they're bouncing back down at Earth and then up and then back down like this. So the heat, the temperature of these sun rays are kept within the atmosphere of the Earth. And because of that heat which is being trapped in our atmosphere, it's heating up the planet. When the planet heats up by just 1 degree centigrade more than average, it creates 7% more precipitation, which basically means that the water in our rivers and streams and seas is being evaporated more than usual. So that water vapor is going into the atmosphere. And when that happens, it creates, it affects the water cycles of the planet. And so we see worse droughts because a lot of the water is being evaporated, which leaves a drought, leaves very dry earth, which means that animals can't survive as easily because they don't have water to drink, and there's worse droughts, so that the crops that we grow don't have the water that they need to actually grow, and because everything's so dry, it's creating more wildfires as well. Now also, because there's a lot more precipitation of water in the air, as well as these other gases, when it actually does rain, it comes down a lot faster and a lot harder and for longer. So you get worse rainfall because of climate change. You actually get worse rainfall when the planet is heating up. So when it does come down, it's much worse. You get worse flooding, much worse flooding than previously. And then it tends to evaporate quickly again. So it evaporates quickly and it comes down hard, and then it evaporates quickly and it comes down hard, and it's just worse. It becomes almost tropical. In addition to that, you have worse storms and hurricanes because of the fact that there's so much more water in the atmosphere to come down. It lasts longer and it's more extreme, and it's affecting the water cycles. So the gases in our atmosphere, they go through changes in temperature, and the higher temperature gases move up, and then when they go up, they tend to cool down again, and then they come back down, and then when they come down, they warm up again, and it moves naturally. It's like a cyclical movement of the air in our atmosphere around. However, because things are heating up so much, it's creating a lot more storm symptoms. So you have worse storms, worse hurricanes, typhoons, worse electrical storms, for example, because there's a lot more kind of energy, there's a lot more electricity being generated, perhaps, although I'm not an expert at storms per se. In addition to that, when it is winter and it snows a lot harder and faster for longer, just like rainfall. It is worse because there's a lot more water in the atmosphere to come down. So when it does snow, it's much worse than it would be previously when we had a normal climate. So when you have global warming, when you have climate change, you have worse droughts, worse wildfires, worse hurricanes and storms, worse rainfall, and worse snowfall. Everything is worse and more extreme in a climate change situation which we are in right now, and it's already begun. We're already in it. It's happening right now. It's happening in real time. We're actually chronicling climate change as we speak. It's at the door, it's in the house, it's climate change. And this is the new abnormal, Jeremy Rifkin says. This worse weather events, this is the new normal. This is something we need to get used to. This isn't just a few years of freak environmental weather conditions. This is now the new abnormal. It's abnormal because it shouldn't be happening, because we should have a stable climate, but because of all the gases we keep producing, because of the fossil fuel system that we use, it's producing a lot worse environmental problems. And we need to get used to this, actually. We need to become resilient to these changes that will happen. However, as you'll learn as you go on through this series, there are things that we can do to both mitigate these issues and ultimately to solve them.
The third industrial revolution.